Scenes of panic and desperation at Kabul airport as Afghans try to flee the country before it's too late. The Taliban is controlling airport access. Those who've helped the international coalition are eligible to leave, but places are limited.
Despite assurances from the Taliban that anyone linked to the government will be given an amnesty, many here are deeply fearful for their future. And that's why we're still seeing these chaotic scenes at the airport.
In a heated emergency debate in the Commons, Boris Johnson was accused of tragic failures towards Afghanistan.
Like many veterans, this last week has been one that has seen me struggle through anger and grief and rage.
We must deal with the world as it is, accepting what we have achieved and what we have not achieved.
With the UK promising to take 20,000 Afghan refugees over time, we hear from one Afghan interpreter still in Kabul, desperate to fly to Britain. Also tonight. Who will help us? The people of Haiti, hit by a massive earthquake 5 days ago, say there's still no assistance. Have festivals and staycations contributed to COVID hotspots? We'll look at the latest evidence.
That's Cinderella. Cinderella is the
And a new take on an old and much-loved tale. 3 years in the making, Cinderella finally opens.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News Channel, Harry Kane not in Tottenham's squad for the Europa Conference League playoff in Portugal, but could feature at Wolves on Sunday.
Good evening. There have been further chaotic scenes outside the international airport in Kabul as thousands of Afghans try to flee the country following its fall to the Taliban. In response to the developing humanitarian crisis, the UK has said it'll take 20,000 Afghan refugees over a number of years. But in Parliament, where MPs were recalled for an emergency debate, Labour attacked the figure as too small. And the government came in for scathing criticism from some Conservative backbenchers over the withdrawal of Western troops that led to the Taliban's return to power. Tonight, Afghanistan's deposed president, Ashraf Ghani, who's fled to the United Arab Emirates, said he had no intention of staying in exile. For our first report on Afghanistan tonight, let's go live to Kabul and join our correspondent, Secunda Kamani. Secunda.
Well, residents here are still grappling with what this Taliban takeover will mean for their lives. In some parts of the city, things seem to be getting back to normal, but there are many who are still deeply, deeply anxious.
Outside the airport, chaos continues. Thousands are still desperate to leave the country. Here, a girl terrified. The Taliban are coming for me, she cries. This family has been camped outside here for 5 days. The situation here is very bad, she says. No one wants to live here. Everyone wants to live in peace and to be able to study. We want to go anywhere that is safe.
Despite assurances from the Taliban that anyone linked to the government will be given an amnesty, many here are deeply fearful for their future. And that's why we're still seeing these chaotic scenes at the airport.
No one's clear yet what comes next. But political discussions have begun. This was the arrival of a deputy leader of the Taliban in Kandahar, their spiritual home. Whilst this is a member of the notorious Haqqani family, deeply entrenched in the Taliban's leadership, meeting with former President Hamid Karzai and other senior Afghan politicians. In a speech tonight from the Gulf, the former President Ashraf Ghani said he supported the efforts and hoped to return to the country. That seems unlikely. In the centre of Kabul, early signs everyday life is beginning to resume. Heavily armed Taliban patrols are all around. But shops and streets are busier than they've been since the takeover. It's not the same as before, says this man. People are scared, but it's better than the past few days at least. There are far fewer women out and about than before, and they're dressed more conservatively, though not in the all-encompassing burqa. Many major businesses have sent female employees home, unsure whether the Taliban will allow them to work. but there have been signs of defiance. This is a protest in support of the Afghan flag, replaced in some areas by the Taliban's. A number of demonstrators were reportedly shot dead in Jalalabad. Whilst this was another rally in eastern Afghanistan. Look at the huge Taliban convoy that's speeding towards it. The Taliban have been making conciliatory noises in public, but many fear they won't tolerate any challenges to their authority. Sikandar Kamani, BBC News, Kabul.
Many of those Afghans who want to come to the UK worked alongside British forces and diplomatic staff in the 20 years since the invasion following the 9/11 terror attacks. Britain's ambassador in Afghanistan says the aim now is to fly out about 1,000 people a day, but he admitted that time was limited. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has been speaking to one Afghan interpreter who is desperate to escape with his family to Britain.
Faces hidden to try to protect them. But a message they want this country to see: UK, please do not leave us. Ahmed, not his real name, was an interpreter for British forces. Now he needs action, not words, trapped in Afghanistan.
Life has ended for us when Kabul collapsed. We are just left behind in a dark room.
Last week, before the Taliban's advance, he was finally given permission to come to the UK. The family celebrated. The next morning, he woke to find Kabul had fallen. He's now hiding.
The Taliban, some of the spokespeople have talked about not wanting revenge, but do you feel that they will come after you for being an interpreter?
Taliban are not trustable. As you know, if they find me, there will be no mercy. I've did a lot of patrols, missions with shoulder to shoulder with British armies as like a family, like a brother. It's a major threat for me. If I go out, if they know me, there will be no mercy and I will face it.
Ahmed worked with UK soldiers for 3 years. He said during fighting, the Taliban would target interpreters as they were the eyes and ears of the forces.
British soldiers were my brothers on that time. I served my country and I served Great Britain forces. I never complain about that, but the situation is now worse, and if everyone who works with coalition forces needs to be relocated as soon as possible.
A small team of British officials are trying to get some of the trapped and frightened Britons and Afghans to the UK. But while they have made it onto planes and many more wait outside the airport, even more stay hidden at home, unsure how they will get out.
How long have we got? It really depends on other things outside our control, the security situation, the approach of the Taliban. We're working on the basis of days, not weeks.
Ahmed now uses his English skills to plead for a way out.
Is there a message you would like to give to the Prime Minister about your family's situation and what help you need?
I just want him to provide a pathway to safety for me and my family. And I beg him.
Lucy Manning, BBC News.
In an impassioned debate in the Commons, MPs from all sides criticised the Prime Minister for the government's role in events in Afghanistan. The former Prime Minister, Theresa May, said it was incomprehensible that the UK was not doing more to maintain a presence. And MPs who've served in the armed forces spoke up for veterans who fought there and who now question what it was all for. But Boris Johnson argued that NATO's core mission in Afghanistan had succeeded. Here's our political correspondent, Ben Wright.
Prime Minister, have you let down Afghanistan?
A statement was written, the explanation prepared. Boris Johnson headed to Parliament, brought back from its summer break.
Prime Minister.
The chamber was crammed, shoulder to shoulder. Now restrictions are lifted.
The sacrifice in Afghanistan is seared into our national consciousness, with 150,000 people serving there from across the length and breadth of the United Kingdom. No matter how grim the lessons of the past, the future is not yet written. And at this bleak turning point, we must help the people of Afghanistan to choose the best of all their possible futures.
The Prime Minister said the US pullout from Afghanistan meant there was little Britain could do. Labour's leader agreed there was no military solution, but said the government had failed to prepare.
There's been a major miscalculation of the resilience of the Afghan forces and staggering complacency from our government about the Taliban threat. The result is that the Taliban are now back in control of Afghanistan. The gains made through 20 years of sacrifice hang precariously.
Supportive Conservative voices were the exception. Many backbenchers were scathing, including a former Prime Minister.
Was our knowledge of the position on the ground so inadequate? Or did we really believe this? Or did we just feel that we had to follow the United States and hope that on a wing and a prayer it would be all right on the night?
Watching on, a demonstration demanding all Afghans who worked for the UK can move here, and there is already a scheme in place. Ministers have said the UK will also take in up to 20,000 refugees over the next few years. In the Commons, there were cross-party calls for more.
It should have a minimum commitment of welcoming at least 35,000 to 40,000 Afghan refugees in the UK.
Numbers matter less than need. We need to reject this artificial distinction between resettlement and asylum.
Today's debate revealed the depth of anger and anguish at what's happened. The words spoken here will make little difference to the immediate situation in Afghanistan, but Boris Johnson looked isolated as MPs queued up to ask how a 20-year commitment unravelled so fast. No more so than those who had served in Afghanistan, fighting in a campaign that cost the lives of 457 servicemen and women.
Like many veterans, this last week has been one that has seen me struggle through anger and grief and rage, the feeling of abandonment of not just a country, but the sacrifice that my friends made.
The House of Commons, full for the first time in over a year, had rarely seemed so quiet.
It's shameful.
Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, throughout the day, council leaders across the country have said that they are ready to provide a safe haven for those fleeing Afghanistan. They're calling on the government to make more money available to fund the resettlement schemes. Our correspondent Alex Forsyth has been to Calderdale in West Yorkshire to see how one community is preparing to welcome Afghan refugees.
Lunch at St Augustine's is about far more than food. This centre supports asylum seekers, offering advice, guidance and a sense of community. These families know what it's like to have to flee your home. Like Jamshidullah, he was an interpreter for the British Army who came to the UK through official routes. Now he can't contact his family, who are still in Afghanistan.
I couldn't get to my mum and dad like 2 months. And I really don't know about them, how the situation of them will be at the moment. And it's just a heartbreaking situation.
The concern about recent events is palpable. Habib, which is not his real name, has family in Kabul. He's desperate for them to join him here.
There's my mom, brother and sister left and wife. So they speaking all cry.
They're all crying?
Yeah.
How are they feeling?
This feel is no good. It's bad.
Here, the idea of a scheme to help resettle refugees from Afghanistan is welcome. But they question whether it will be enough, whether some might try to make it on their own. Florence didn't come to the UK through official channels. She claimed asylum in 2016 and said the process can be tough.
I was not allowed to go to school. I was not allowed to do anything within my community.
How was that?
So it was really bad. I felt like I'm in a country that came to seek safety, but it's worse than I was before.
This part of West Yorkshire's long welcomed those seeking sanctuary. For more than 20 years, Calderdale's taken in asylum seekers, and it volunteered to settle Syrians during the war. The council says it's ready to step up again, but the leader says they must have support.
We want to be open and welcoming, but we do need proper support from the government to enable us to do that without it having an impact on local people and local services.
In Halifax town centre, there is empathy for the plight of Afghans, but also awareness that public services, not least housing, are already under pressure.
Half of me says that, yes, I think we should help out. The other half is saying there's obviously people in this country, right, who are British citizens, right, who need help and support.
If it stays at 20,000, that's fine. But it's when it starts to get into 500,000 and 1 million people.
Where else are they going to go? I think it's really important that everybody opens the doors to these people.
That is the political challenge, balancing the need to open the doors with the needs of existing communities. A challenge with much at stake for so many. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Halifax.
Let's go back now to Sikandar Kamani, who's in Kabul for us. So, Sikandar, huge tension surrounding the airlift out of Kabul and also around how the Taliban are going to govern.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's still a sense of shock amongst many of the people I speak to here. No one expected things to unravel quite as quickly as they did. Remember, just 2 weeks ago, the Taliban didn't control a single major city. Now they're in control of the whole country, and it's really difficult to overstate how pervasive their presence here in Kabul is. I was walking along a street in the centre of the city a little earlier, and there was a fighter strolling casually along with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher on his back. But as you say, the Taliban's biggest challenges begin now in many ways. Now they've captured the country, what are they going to do with it? How are they going to reconcile their more hardline interpretation of Sharia law with the more modern, more democratic vision of the country that's been developed over the past 2 decades? We've seen in the east of the country the first show of public defiance against the Taliban with these protests in Jalalabad and other towns across the east of Afghanistan, the Taliban responding with violence there. Now, they've always insisted they're going to create an inclusive and Islamic government, but they've always been very vague, some suspect deliberately vague, about what that means. Afghans and the rest of the world will find out what it does mean in the coming days and weeks.
OK, Sikandar, thank you very much. Sikandar Kamani there in Kabul for us. Let's take a look now at the government's latest coronavirus figures, and they show that there were 33,904 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average there were 30,177 new cases per day in the last week. 6,321 people are currently in hospital with the virus. 111 deaths were recorded in the past 24 hours, with an average of 94 deaths a day in the past week. On vaccinations, 89.6% of adults in the UK have now had their first jab, and more than 77.5% have had 2 jabs. Well, after falling over recent weeks, the average number of daily confirmed COVID cases is now showing signs of a small rise. So how much pressure is there on local areas? Have COVID hotspots appeared because of staycations or events like music festivals? Our health editor Hugh Pym reports.
There hasn't been the big surge in infections which some experts had predicted for August. UK case numbers are lower than mid-July. But there are some areas where there's been an increase in recent weeks, including Cornwall, partly linked to the influx of holidaymakers. There have been reports of positive tests among some of those who were at a surfing and music festival at Newquay last week. Local officials say it's too early to judge that from the data, but they acknowledge that COVID has been spreading in some parts of the county.
As people mix in large numbers, particularly if they're unvaccinated, there's the likelihood that there will be spread amongst that particular age group. We are seeing in general that the 18 to 30-year-olds are having the highest rates of infection in our area.
Of the top 10 infection hotspots in England as of last week, 3 were in Cornwall. 2 more were in the Isle of Wight, another tourist destination. Some others were further north in England. That's in terms of cases relative to the local population.
We're going to see influxes of people to certain holiday destinations. And while that doesn't change the official population figures, it means that there are a lot more people within an area. And a lot more people in an area means there is going to be much more chance of COVID and much more chance of transmission.
Indoor social mixing was said to be a factor with an infection spike in Lincoln. A surge in cases was linked to a nightclub, though numbers have since fallen back. Whatever the COVID impact might be on hospitals, the NHS in the southwest of England is already under pressure, with ambulances having to wait at some hospitals to hand over patients.
We've got a combination of some rising numbers of COVID cases, but that's set alongside the fact that people are trying to go full pelt to recover the care backlogs. We've also got lots of people who are seeking urgent and emergency care at the same time as staff are off on leave, and also we've had large numbers of staff self-isolating.
With pop-up vaccination centres, local health chiefs in the southwest are urging people to get their jabs and do regular lateral flow tests. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The latest official figures on the cost of living show that prices are rising more slowly than some experts predicted. The Consumer Prices Index, which is a way of measuring inflation, was 2% in July. That compares to 2.5% the previous month. Cheaper clothing is one reason for the dip, but some are warning that inflation could go much higher later this year. 5 days after a devastating earthquake in Haiti and then a tropical storm, aid in many places has yet to arrive. Nearly 2,000 people are now known to have died. Much of the response effort has yet to reach rural areas, which are severely lacking in emergency support and supplies. Our correspondent James Clayton reports now from the village of Marceline, near the epicentre.
As you head out from the city of Lekai to rural Marceline, the road is marked by landslides and deep cracks. The village is remote and the scale of the damage catastrophic. Rosemarie took me to her house. Her 15-year-old son was charging his phone when the quake hit. The wall collapsed on him.
These are his books. He had recently got them so he could start a new year of school. And now he's gone. I wrap his shirt around my waist. It keeps me strong.
When you come to these rural areas, the level of destruction just ups a notch. Almost every single house here is completely destroyed. 5 people were killed in this house alone. And to understand why, you have to look at the cement and rock that these houses are built from. It's really hard to lift this. It's really heavy. And of course, when those kinds of walls fall down, they can cause catastrophic injuries.
With no sign of aid or help, many people are living on top of the rubble of what was their homes. Do we have to scream for the government to hear us, this woman says, or is life over? The people of Haiti feel like they've been forgotten, and in many ways they have. James Clayton, BBC News, Marceline.
Comedian Sean Locke has died from cancer at the age of 58. An acclaimed stand-up and sitcom actor, he was perhaps best known for his long-running work appearing on the panel show 8 out of 10 Cats.
I don't think a dictionary's got enough words in it to describe me. You know, I think I'm such an amazing, complicated. I'm more like a sensation, an idea. Yeah. I think the best way to describe me is with a fragrance.
The comedian Sean Locke, who's died at the age of 58. Entertainment and theatre in particular has been one of the sectors hardest hit by COVID. The recent easing of restrictions means that many productions are now back on stage, including Cinderella, the new musical by Andrew Lloyd Webber. Here's the BBC's Alan Yentob.
Yes, fingers crossed, theatre is back. COVID, all being well, is under control. Social distancing is over, for now. And Andrew Lloyd Webber's much-anticipated new musical, Cinderella, is back in town.
"3 years in the making, weeks of previews, then they were pinged, and the show did not go on. This radical take on the Cinderella story was written by the Oscar winner, Emerald Fennell.
Well, here we are. So the show's on, eh?
You never know, but short of us having to be taken screaming from the theatre, it's going to open.
I have to say, this is unlike any other Cinderella that I've ever seen. This is, I mean, my phrase is this is a Cinderella for our time.
it's the most well-known story in the world, and so that it's good and bad. It means that the audience anticipates certain things, they expect certain things, and so really the conversation we had was, well, how do we do something new? How do we make it a story that feels exciting and gripping while still having all of the shoe, the clock at midnight, you know, the transformation, all those things. So it was about surprising the audience.
But I think the thing that converted me to finally doing it was the central message that Emerald's written, which is don't change yourself, because don't change yourself to be what you believe other people want you to be. And I think that's a very important message for our time, really. And it made me think, yeah, I can do this.
And they have.
That's Cinderella. Cinderella is the catty name that they call me. Call me back, Cinderella. I will not say goodbye. You've been hateful since I've been.
It has joy, and I think it does have romance.
It has joy.
Even if the romance doesn't quite go the way that everybody might expect.
Has joy, it has romance, and crucially, and the thing that is most important to me anyway, is it has a fairly long erotic male dance sequence.
Well, that is, of course, the reason she did the show, but we don't need to go into that for this audience.
That report by Alan Yentob. That's it. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a very good night. Bye-bye.